On the 5th of March in Sevastopol, a torpedo boat G5, which sank during the Second World War, was lifted from the bottom of the Black Sea. The boat sank at the exit from the Corentin Bay, where a brigade of torpedo boats of the Black Sea Fleet was based during the defense of Sevastopol 1941–1942. The ship lay underwater for 78 years. Despite this, its body is well preserved. It was at a depth of 12 meters. G5 is a small warship. It was intended to defeat enemy military and transport ships. During the Second World War, the crews of such boats went to night raids, attacked the enemy, landed troops, evacuated the wounded and rescued the pilots who had been shot down from the water. The discovered boat was part of the Black Sea Fleet Brigade, which was based in Corentin Bay. Before lifting, divers examined the boat for torpedoes and other explosive objects. The ship was reached using a floating crane. Currently, the search group is working in the archives to establish the boat number and crew names. It is already known that during the defense of Sevastopol, enemy aircraft were able to sink 6 boats of this series. With a high degree of probability, we can say that this boat is number 61, which sank on June 15, 1942. In the future, it is planned to restore the appearance of the boat and install it on a pedestal as a monument to the heroic defense of Sevastopol. I hope that soon we will find out the names of the crew and their future fate. In 2004, in the village of Iskrena, Cherkasky region, the Panzerkampf wagon Panther, the killer vehicle of the most famous SS Viking tank division, was lifted from under the soil. In his book Victims of the Germans' Victory in the Kasansky Cauldron, Helmut Vogel writes, "There was only one bridge across the Shpolka in Iskrena, and it looked solid and credible enough. The first Panther entered the bridge and safely drove to the north shore of Shpolka, but under the weight of the second Panther the bridge broke down. The tank recovered in the village of Iskrena is the same Panther tank under the weight of which the bridge collapsed. In this photo you can see how the powerful war machine helplessly goes down under the water." Nowadays, there are about 20 pieces of Panzerkampf Panther tanks of various modification and varying degrees of completeness. 2 in Fort Knox, USA, 4 in Saumur, France, and 1 each in the museums of Europe, Canada, USA and Russia. Plus a few incomplete hulls, which are also very highly valued as historical rarities, but in the strict sense they cannot be considered. So here, in 2004, in the area of village Shpolka, Cherkasky region, Ukraine, a severely damaged Panther was found. Pay attention to the damages on the port side. What the shell was it? Of course, the tank, although badly damaged, didn't find a place in the museums of Ukraine. Now Cherkasky Panther is in the Autotechnik Museum, Zinheim, Germany, and it's already impossible to get it back from there. By the way, the tank took its place in the exposition only in 2007. Here are a few excerpts from the Search Party journal we couldn't pass by. At the Panther excavation, Vladimir Kosenko lost the tip of his index finger. The caterpillar of the tank decomposed in his arms. He was entirely there, he said. He managed to remove his head, but not his hand. Another moment was remembered for a lifetime. During the excavation, a friend of Vladimir hit the shell capsule and it hissed immediately. There were 6 people in the pit, including a Russian banker, but only 2 realized what could happen. Both froze with shovels in their hands, instinctively closing their eyes. About 10 seconds later, when it became clear that there would be no explosion, Vladimir opened his eyes. His friend straightened up and said in a muffled voice, "I gonna get vodka." In 2017, a dive bomber PE-2 with the crew was raised out of the swamp near Varfolomeevka in Primorsky region. The plane was at a depth of 5 meters. With the help of an excavator, the searchers managed to get the details of PE-2, the machine gun of a gunner radioman along with a parachute. This indicates that the crew couldn't leave the falling plane. The navigator's clipboard was the most valuable find. The navigational ruler, the documents and the maps were in a very good condition. In the evening, the searchers were able to pass the documents. There was a newspaper Trivoga among the other finds, dated the 2nd of May 1942. When it dried out, it was possible to read almost every line. An engine with the serial numbers was also raised, what made possible to establish the names of the crew members. An interesting find was discovered by a searcher from the Smolensk region in 2013. It was a gas AAA truck. Here is how the searcher himself describes this case. The truck was found even earlier, in 2009. We have always passed by it and made a couple of photos and smoked sitting on its cap. Those were the times when we searched without GPS. We spent the whole season there and this truck was the only thing we found. Well, that time we've decided to do nothing about it and left it in the swamp. 4 years have passed, the year 2013 has come and our attitude towards the finds has changed dramatically. We decided to go back to those places and see if the truck was still there. We left in the morning, planning to reach the spot by noon. We spread out in the woods and began searching. 4 hours passed, but still no sign of the truck. We almost decided that somebody had already towed it. So we got tired and took a little smoke break. Suddenly, we heard a tracked vehicle moving our way. It was not a coincidence, the woods were not cut down there and no one would get there in transit. Someone sold us out and so-called competitors were following us. In this situation, those who find the vehicle are the winners. So the search intensified. We began to jump over the debris like Olympic champions with saws, backpacks, shovels and a gun. I literally ran my heart out. Good luck was on our side. Luckily, I saw a piece of tin when I was jumping over another tree trunk. When I pulled it out from under the roots, I realized that it was a part of the truck door. The truck itself was somewhere nearby, but the forest has dramatically changed over these years. After having climbed a fallen tree, we finally saw the truck we came for. 30 minutes later, our competitors came up and we just discussed the situation without any rudeness and insults, so they drove away. We continued to feast on the skeleton of the legendary truck. After lunch, we began to clear the cap and searched with a metal detector all around. We understood that the vehicle was burnt. A truck was loaded with 37mm German shells and the shells were scattered around the area. 3 German helmets, 2 bayonet knives were found under the truck. The tow bar was not standard, but the German one. All proved that the Nazis drove the truck, but it was burnt. After it was burned, the engine and the front axle were removed, and all that came under heavy fire was left. The truck was cleared and the photo shoot began. Unfortunately, I didn't shoot the process of a truck expert, but it was a very laborious process and it took 3 days. 2 years after the truck was taken out, it was restored. Another story is from a searcher from the Belgorod region. Unfortunately, he decided not to describe the discovery of this military artifact in detail, but the uniqueness of this find itself deserves to be told about. In 2017, the perfectly preserved German motorcycle Zandab KS600 was found. Only the rear wheel was missing. The state of this find is simply unique. After cleaning out, it turned out that the motorcycle was painted yellow over the original color. a tactical sign of a motorcycle platoon, and the emblem of the 14th Wehrmacht Tank Division were of particular interest. The motorcycle was a two-seater with some kind of obscure metal box suitcase and a completely preserved exhaust system. Even both license plates were in place. Only the rear wheel wasn't found. A hot debate broke out about how to restore this vehicle. Some suggested removing the top coat of paint, while the others suggested leaving it as it is for a museum. There were also those who wanted to disassemble the motorcycle in parts for sale. 3 weeks later, the lucky searcher ended the dispute himself, making it clear that the motorcycle was already sold. In the summer 2014, work on raising the gas truck from the riverbed of Mstar River was underway for 3 days alone. It was finally recovered from 4 meters depth and delivered to the Novgorod Kremlin. We were able to examine it in detail only this summer. The truck was recognized as gas The remains of a driver were found in the cab, and 120mm divisional mortar and 34 mines in the back of the truck. Later, the regional demining team and Novgorod rescuers joined the inspection work. The remains of the driver were also removed that time. They were handed over to the members of the Novgorod Regional Search Expedition, the Valley. However, not a single item that could be used to prove the soldier's identity was found in his pocket. It could be a dog tag, medals, or personal items with inscription. It was only clear that he died in the winter 1944, during the offensive operation of the Soviet troops to liberate Novgorod. But the searchers do not lose hope of finding information about the deceased in the military archives. The loss of the truck with the divisional mortar and full ammunition should have been reflected in the frontline reports. By the way, recently we've got confirmation of the version that there was more than one soldier in that truck. 4 small arms were also found in the cab and on board, rifles and machine guns. So perhaps the searchers from the valley will be able to establish the names of several more soldiers who died there. The truck was perfectly preserved in clay except for the cab. The tires looked like new. They were even inflated. The frame and the engine by the Czechoslovakian Water Company 1939 release were intact. After half a year, the truck was completely restored. Nowadays, it can be seen in the local museum. In the spring of 1917, several units of military vehicles from the times of the Second World War were lifted from the bottom of the Don River in the Voronezh region. At this point, in 1942, a crossing took place and the Red Army troops retreated to the other side of the river. This is the American light tank General Stuart. It was supplied to the Red Army under Lend-Lease. Also, the German self-propelled artillery Stug 3 and the Soviet diesel tractor Stalinist, which was used to tow heavy guns, were found. The work was compromised by a strong current and very poor visibility. There was no tower on the General Stuart tank. Local residents say that in the 70s of the 20th century they were already trying to get it, but only the tower could be torn off since the tank was heavily submerged in silt. The tank had full ammunition and 2 Browning machine guns. The tractor was in excellent condition and fully complete. Apparently, during the raid of German aircraft, the vehicles were flooded. Historians couldn't answer how a German artillery could be in this place as well. It was badly damaged. It can be assumed that the German units also tried to cross the river, but were attacked by Soviet troops or aircraft, and the Stug 3 was defeated and sank. A lot of ammunition, 2 kitchen wagons and the remains of trucks that were yet to be lifted were found by divers. On July 14, 2016, in the surrounding area of the village Ukrainian Builovka in Voronezh region, the Soviet medium tank T-3476 was raised. This machine was produced by the Stalingrad plant and is considered unique since the T-3476 of this type no longer exists. This is the only vehicle out of 1,000 produced. All tanks of this type were destroyed in the battles of the 41st and 42nd. The tank managed to take part in the hostilities. At least 2 hits from a German anti-tank gun were counted on the hull, and the engine was broken. Fortunately, the crew was not in the tank, but the ammunition was inside. There was also a detector machine gun and discs with cartridges for it. After the ammunition was removed, the T-34 was sent to Moscow to the Armed Forces Museum in the Kubinka, where it was waiting for its turn for restoration. In 2018, the remains of a Soviet aircraft were discovered near the T-34 tank lift site. Presumably, it was Il-2. This is indicated by shells for the aircraft gun. With the help of an excavator, parts of the combat vehicle were extracted. After examining the crash site, experts came to the conclusion that the plane was shot down and burned. Unfortunately, all large parts of the airframe were removed after the war, and only small fragments were lifted from the ground. On the second day of excavation, several small fragments of the bones of the pilots were found. Perhaps during the war local residents were able to bury the bulk of the remains of the pilots. At the moment, the burial place and the names of the pilots couldn't be established. Thank you all for watching, subscribe to our channel and see you soon! The historians faced unknown circumstances of an airfighter crash during the Second World War in the Murmansk region, where the crashed plane was found. The divers salvaged the vehicle. The operation lasted several days. The American Air Cobra, which was supplied by the Allies more than 70 years ago, laid at the bottom of the lake in a dense layer of silt. Divers did their best not to bother silt, because the visibility became zero and the operation had to be interrupted. Then the find was towed to the shore. Only there the airfighter was lifted out of the water with crane. The experts didn't find the remains of the pilot in the cockpit. In addition, the wing was chopped down as if someone tried to get to the fuel tank to drain the fuel. Most likely, when the plane crashed, it got stuck in ice and the dead pilot was taken out. But the experts still need to have this version checked. In this video, we will show a selection of weapons found in old houses and sheds. This find was made during cleaning up the barn in April 2017. A guy dismantles the wooden shields between the beams where his family stored grain. After partial dismantling, he noticed a metal box about 1.5 meters from the ground on the beam. The box was about 30 by 15 centimeters. It was rewound with wire and there was something inside wrapped in old rags. He decided to check the contents of the box before throwing it away. In a piece of dirty cloth, probably the sleeve of a man's shirt, someone hid 2 pistols several decades ago. The larger was a Walther P38 9mm caliber, which has been in German armed forces since 1940, as well as the German Lilliput 1926 model 6 and 35mm caliber. On January 25, 2020, children played in the building of the Brest Fortress, where the first battle between the Red Army and the German troops took place. The boy said that he was walking with his friends in a fortress on the ramparts of the Kobrin fortification. On the mound, the guys came across an object sticking out the sand. It turned out to be an old gun. The boy brought it home and his mother took it to the police. The find was a German Walther Luftpistole 1934 signal pistol. The weapon was in a very good condition. This find was discovered by a worker when dismantling an old building. In the attic of the house, a bundle with 2 guns inside was found. He reported the find to the police. In a survey of the former residence, it was not possible to find out to whom this weapon could belong. During the examination, it was possible to establish that one of the pistols is the Hungarian Femaru M37 9mm caliber 1937 model. The second gun is a German Browning caliber 6.35mm 1906. More recently, when repairing the floor of an old house in Poland, 2 antique pistols were found. The police is trying to find out who they belong to and how they got there. Judging by the rust, these 2 revolvers lay in a cache for a long time. They were fully loaded. One was an Austrian-made Restengasse M1898. The second looked like a pocket bulldog-type revolver. The 360-kilogram Nazi eagle, raised by researchers in 2006 from the scuttled ship of the Third Reich, Admiral Graf Spee, will be sold at an auction. The Nazi symbol was found by researchers in La Plata Bay near Montevideo, where a German cruiser sank 80 years ago after one of the first naval battles of the Second World War, having destroyed 11 British merchant ships by that time. The corresponding decision was made by the court in Uruguay. It was in the territorial waters of this country, in the Gulf of La Plata, that a valuable historical artifact was found. Experts estimate the possible sale amount at £20 million. However, Alfredo Echegaray, who led the expedition to extract the Nazi symbol from the seabed more than 13 years ago, expects to gain at least £50 million. According to him, museums from all over the world, the German government and private collectors showed interest in buying. The representative of the Uruguayan Jewish Committee, Ernesto Kreimerman, is convinced that the eagle should go to the museum but not to the private trader. In turn, the director of the Commission on the Cultural Heritage of Uruguay, Miguel Morris, considers it important to prevent the illegal circulation of cultural and historical objects, while noting that he had nothing against additional earnings for researchers. According to Echegaray, the eagle should be in public domain so that the world can learn from the past. Russia has its own similar eagle, which is stored in the Museum of the Federal Security Service. This eagle is unique. It used to adorn the main building of Nazi Germany. It weighs 350 kilograms. The wings of the bird are pierced by bullets. This eagle adorned the Reich Chancellery Mosaic Hall. In 2019, a Russian treasure hunter from the Orenburg region discovered a cache of 2 officer checkers of 1838. Such findings are extremely rare and unique, and the accidental find of 2 pieces at once is a very surprising case for those who are interested in ancient edged weapons. It can be assumed that the checkers were hidden by their owner during the Civil War in the early 20th century. The metal of the blades was very rotten, but the rest of the details can be used for the restoration of the other samples. A box with gold coins, bars and jewelry, which has been lying under the beam of an old Jewish house for more than 70 years, was found during the reconstruction of an old building in the city of Grodno. The casket contained 23 gold coins of the Russian Empire and the interwar Polish period, the so-called Jadwig, more than a dozen rings, 2 chains, several gold bars, gilded tooth crowns and several merchant documents. The total weight of gold products was about 500 grams. We can say that this is a gold deposit. Perhaps someone saved it for a rainy day. Now we save money in dollars and euros, and this person did it in gold, said Jan, a historian and junior researcher at the Grodno Historical and Archaeological Museum of Lelewicz. According to preliminary and conservative estimates, the value of the treasure can be at least $15,000. And here is another find from the time of the Civil War. There were rumors that during the advance of the Red Army on the outskirts of the village, cars with weapons were hidden. Search group decided to check this legend. Literally, at the first tower, the metal detector showed the presence of a large amount of iron. There was a huge ammunition depot in 30 centimeters from the surface. Shells and grenades of the early 20th century lay in several large pits. There was a very rich specimen of the Zelensky grenade among the heap of ammunition. None of the museums had a sample of it, and its model could be determined only by description. A group of Russian divers from the city of Novorossiysk took part in raising sunken Second World War military equipment from the Black Sea. A group of 4 divers examined several German Sturmgeschütz 3 self-propelled guns at a depth of 20 meters. All of them were on a Santov transport ship sunk in 1943 by a Soviet submarine. Within a few days, it was possible to raise part of the military equipment and deliver it to the shore. Now the restorers will take care of it. In the Sumy region, in a Nikolaev-Moscow train compartment, a cache with a MP40 machine gun and a Mauser pistol was discovered. The train followed through the Zernovoye railway checkpoint. Border guards and customs officers were already waiting for it, because they received information on the possible cross-border movement of weapons. The State Border Service of Ukraine reports that a service dog discovered the find as a result of checking. Packets of weapons were hidden under the lid of the heating system. The owner of the find wished to remain anonymous. The weapons were seized. Now the circumstances of the offense are being clarified and the persons involved in moving the finds across the border are being identified. In 2017, in Belarus, in the Vitebsk region, parts of the KV-1 tank were raised from the swamp, a part of the hull and the turret. This tank is unique as it has a turret with L11 cannon. There is no another KV-1 with such a turret in the world, since they produced a very small amount of about 140 units total. All tanks of this series were lost in the first months of the war in 1941. Larger parts of the tank couldn't be found. Apparently, an ammunition explosion occurred inside. After the war, most of the tank were handed over for scrap, and the heavy turret and part of the hull couldn't be taken out. Now the tank is restored and takes part in the historical reenactment of the Second World War. In the summer of 2019 in Russia, in the Rostov region, the remains of the KV-1 tank with the dead crew were discovered. Most likely, the KV-1 ran over a landmine and the chassis were damaged. The crew didn't leave the tank and continued to fight. The Germans began firing off heavy weapons. A few unexploded mortars found a testify to this. Later, the Ju-87 dive bombers came flying. Ammunition exploded from a direct hit inside the tank. Near the tank, the search group found about 30 more dead Soviet soldiers. From the bottom of the Black Sea, in the area of the Crimean Bridge, the first of the found Il-2 attack aircrafts from the Second World War was lifted. Remains of the pilots were not found in the cockpit. In total, the search group discovered 3 Soviet Il-2s at the bottom of the Black Sea. They are preserved in satisfactory condition and lie at a depth of about 10 meters in the area of the Kerch Strait. The search group will now establish the identity of the Il-2 to aviation units, the names of the crew members and the date of their death. Probably the planes were shut down in 1943 during the Kerch-Eltingen landing operation, carried out with the aim of liberating the Kerch Peninsula. And here is another Il-2 found near Novorossiysk. They were looking for it for 2 years. Divers work at the place of discovery. They're trying to clear the stormtrooper of silt and get to the engine. This will help identify the aircraft by number. The work is complicated by the fact that the Il-2 lies upside down. In addition, it's impossible to get the remains of the pilot to establish his identity. More than 36,000 Il-2s were produced during the war. The Il-2 was nicknamed the Flying Tank because of its reliability and effective attacks during the Second World War. The Germans called it Black Death. Archaeologists and divers will continue to work near the Crimea and Taman. Researchers are convinced that more than 2,000 objects of the Great Patriotic War are located in this area. In 2019, in the Prokhorovsky district near Belgorod, a search group discovered the German tank Panzerkampf WW2. The tank was hit during the Grand Battle of the Kursk Bulge in August 1943. Apparently, the ammunition exploded inside the tank and the hull was completely destroyed. The combat vehicle was of sand color, which indicated the arrival of this tank from the African Corps. The Germans were in a hurry to bring the tank into battle that didn't even have time to apply a camouflage color. 722, this number is clearly visible on the turret. It makes it possible to establish the entire combat path of the tank and the crew names. Despite the fact that such a tank was mass-produced and not unique, only a few remain now. It's impossible to assemble the whole machine from the found parts, but many elements can be used by restorers to recreate other similar tanks. Shortly before this, a turret from such a Panzerkampf WW2 was found near Staria Skol city in excellent condition. The notorious Sychovka became the scene of fierce battles in 1942. For both the Red Army and the Wehrmacht, the Battle of Rjev was a huge loss. A huge amount of abandoned equipment remained on the battlefields, but the country needed metal and all captured weapons, including tanks, were sent for remelting. But one German Panzerkampf WW3 was lucky. He drowned in a swamp and was raised only in 2002. The tank was in excellent condition, the native color was perfectly preserved. There was a full ammunition, a machine gun, crew personal belongings and MP-40 assault rifles inside. Unfortunately, the fate of this tank is tragic. They planned to illegally sell it to Belarus. The tower and caterpillars were detained at the border while trying to export under the guise of scrap metal and after some time were sent to Moscow Museum. But the hull was nevertheless taken out and is currently exhibited in the Museum of Minsk with a fake turret. In February 2020, the tower of the legendary T-34 was taken out of the ground in the Belgorod region. The tank turret with number 31 was discovered by local residents in the village of Yakovlevo. The search group of the Ognenaya Duga Club and the police arrived at the place of the find. After that, the turret of the tank was lifted by a crane from the ground, though without the upper part where the hatches were located. It looks like there was an explosion of the ammunition and the turret was blown up by an explosion. This is evidenced by the absence of the upper part of the turret. This could happen from an enemy shell hit, or the crew themselves could blow the T-34 up so that it wouldn't go to the enemy. After the swamp mud was washed away from the turret, it was discovered that there was no shutter or sight on the tank gun. Therefore, the searchers came to the conclusion that the tank was blown up by the crew during the forces' retreat in March 1943, when the Soviet troops had to leave Belgorod, which was liberated almost a month before. Missing company on Elbrus. In July 1942, the Germans launched an offensive to the Caucasus. The operation was codenamed Edelweiss, which later became associated with the 1st Wehrmacht Mountain Rifle Division, which participated in the capture of the Grey Peaks. The Soviet command, in our opinion, neglected the planning of the defense of the Caucasus, so most of the territories was seized actually without a fight. The mistake of the Red Army was that the Soviet generals considered the Caucasus as an impregnable wall on the Germans' way, so only the most easily passable passes were defended. This allowed the well-equipped Germans to enter through the mountain passes to the rear of the Red Army and to master quickly all the key heights. Already on August 21, the Germans hoisted their flags on the western peak of Elbrus and took up defense in a mountain hotel on the southern slope of the highest point in Europe. Guren Grigorians personally volunteered to go on an assault on the mountain. At the same time, the party of the young lieutenant had neither climbing experience nor equipment. The offensive seemed suicide, but Grigorians still took a risk. On the night of September 27th, avoiding visual contact, the former hairdresser brought the fighters to the approaches to the hotel, to the height of about 10,000 meters. The soldiers were not even dressed for the weather. September 98, 1943, at 4 a.m. the Grigorians party began the assault. The Germans met the Red Army with hard machine gun fire. And as it turned out later, the Germans exceeded Grigoryan's party by 2 times in human resources and firepower. The report to the headquarters demonstrates the progress of the battle. The party of Lieutenant Grigoryans moved forward along the snowy field and was stopped by strong gun and machine gun fire from command heights in the area of the 11th shelter. Encountering enemy fire, Grigoryans immediately deployed a party and led the attack, leaving no reserves. The enemy concentrated the entire mass of fire on the party, frustrating the main forces. Grigoryans, neglecting death, shouting "Hooray!" and "For-Stalin!", attacked the enemy twice, moving forward, and only having lost 3/4 of the personnel, he stayed in place and fought until 2 p.m. of 28th of September. Having lost more than a half of the company, wounded and killed, Grigoryans decided to take one of the hollows on the outskirts of the hotel and keep the defense to the last drop of blood. To the Germans' proposal to surrender and guarantees not only of preserving lives but also of freedom, the mountain huntsmen suggested that the Red Army soldiers surrender their weapons and return to the location of their units. Grigoryans answered with a decisive refusal. They shot back from Nazis to the last man. No one surrendered and no one left position. All dead. After a mortar attack, the positions of the Red Army fell silent. The Germans, struck by the staunchness of the Soviet soldiers, rushed to the hollow to get the wounded Red Army soldiers, but no one was alive. It turned out to recapture the Caucasus from the Soviet Unions only by January 20, 1943, and on February 13th a red flag was again hoisted over Elbrus. The fate of Lieutenant Grigoryans remained for a long time shrouded in mystery. Only in 2014 the remains of a dead company and the mummified body of the lieutenant were discovered in a glacier near the Pastukhov Rocks. 500-kilogram bomb. In the Voronezh region, a tractor driver carried out excavation work and dug up an aerial bomb from the Second World War. He reported this case to the police, and the military representatives came to the place of the find. It was decided to detonate the bomb without moving it, since its transportation was too dangerous. 4 meters of sand were placed on top to reduce risk of projection of fragments and the force of the explosion itself, since the houses were too close.
Огонь!
After the explosion, the crater was 10 meters wide. The Panzerkampf WW2 tank. In Ukraine, in 1996, the German Panzerkampf WW2 tank was raised from the Yuzhny Bug river. It drowned, having fallen from the pontoon crossing in the area of the Voskresensk city. The location of the tank was reported by the German side. The combat vehicle lay at a depth of 10 meters, partially immersed in silt. Divers had to erode mud to get it out. With a winch, the tank was pulled to the shore and then raised by a crane. Panzerkampf WW2 was in excellent condition without any damage. The sappers examined the tank and reported the presence of 70% of the ammunition. The tank was cleared of silt and transported for restoration. $1,000 kilos bomb. In Belarus, at a depth of 1 meter, an excavator hooked an object that looked like a bomb. All work was stopped and the mining brigade was called. It turned out to be a German bomb weighing 1 ton. The explosive in it weighed 210 kilograms. If it would explode, the fragments would be found in the area of 2,000 meters. The bomb technician inspected the bomb since the time detonator could have been working due to the impact of the excavator arm head. Having cleaned the sand and soil in the place of fuse, it was possible to read the year 1942. It was decided to bring the bomb to the military training ground for destruction. Already at dusk, the shell was mined and an explosion was made in complete darkness.
Готовы? Готов! Огонь!
In the summer of 2013, on the height of 112 in the foothills of Munster-Tuturi mountain range, members of the Zapolyarny Rubezh military club discovered the remains of 2 Red Army soldiers shot by the Germans in 1941. The place of the execution was found according to a photo taken by the soldiers of the 126th Tyrol Mountain Rifle Regiment of the 2nd Mountain Rifle Division of the Mountain Corps, Norway. Soviet soldiers were shot for revenge, since during the only one battle for this height the Rangers lost 16 people killed and 11 wounded. They lost more people than for their entire Polish company, and the Nazis were furious. So the commanders decided to raise the morale of German soldiers by the public execution. After all, the perseverance of the Russians was a big surprise for the Germans. Looking at these old photos, one cannot help but admire the courage of the fighters sentenced to death. They know that they will be shot now, but the way one of the Red Army men looks at his executioners suggests that he is not afraid of them. There is a disregard for his killers in his eyes. One of the dead, the one in the overcoat, was Sergei Makarovich Korolkov, who was 29 years old at the time of the execution. His name was identified by the found medallion. At the beginning of the war, he left a wife and a little daughter at home. Unfortunately, the name of the second soldier, a junior commander who looks so contemptuously at his executioners, remains unknown. Korolkov's daughter, Nina Krylova, was found and still lives in the Tver region. The warriors were buried with military honors. A First World War soldier's bedroom has lain completely untouched in his former home since he died from injuries 102 years ago. Dragoon Second Lieutenant Hubert Rochero died aged 21 in an English field ambulance after fighting in the village of Loke, Flanders on the 26th of April 1918. His heartbroken parents, initially unable to locate their son's body, said they would turn his bedroom into a permanent shrine to his memory. Mr. Rochero was buried in a British cemetery and lay undiscovered by his family until 4 years after the war ended in 1922. He was repatriated to a graveyard at his home village of Balibar, 44 miles from Poitiers, southwestern France. His bedroom, where he was also born, remains untouched to this day as a permanent memorial. His parents kept the room exactly as he left it, and when they bequeathed the large family home to French General Eugene Bridoux, they stipulated no item should be moved inside it for at least 500 years. After the France's defeat in the Second World War, General Bridoux fled to Spain and his property was confiscated. The house was rented by a family of solicitors initially, until it was purchased by General Bridoux's granddaughter and her husband Daniel Fabre in the 1950s. Mr. Fabre was still living at the property in 2014. Aware of the hidden shrine in the house, they eventually decided to take down the brick wall concealing it. General Bridoux's granddaughter's husband Daniel Fabre told French newspaper that he would keep the room intact not out of pity but out of respect. A sense of responsibility and perhaps pride certainly haunted this family of soldiers, one of whose ancestors had served as house marshal under Napoleon, he said. Rochero, who was born in 1896, received a posthumous Croix de Guerre for his courage in battle, which was placed on his bed by his parents before they left the house. On the 1st of January 1943, a Soviet submarine L-24 didn't return to the base as planned. On the 11th of January 1943, an entry appeared in the Black Sea Fleet's historical journal that L-24 had been considered lost in a combat mission. Reason, time and place were not established. In 1988, a Bulgarian Institute of Oceanography research vehicle discovered an object identified as a submarine at the bottom of the Black Sea near Cape Chablais. On the 7th of June 2009, during the search expedition bowed to the ships of the Great Victory. The remains of a submarine lying at a depth of 59 meters were investigated. It turned out to be the missing L-24. Divers cleared the 4 100mm gun and read the Russian marking B-24 and 069 below, which corresponds to the L-24 submarine. The hatches were locked, the stern steering wheel was in a position to rise. A chain of min wrap was wound around the right screw. There was a large tear portside below a waterline in the area of the third compartment. At the time of the submarine's loss, there were no minefields in this place. Apparently, the boat came across a mine took off by a storm. For 3 days, divers cleaned the submarine hatch from shells. After opening, an air bubble burst from the hatch and a rescue buoy surfaced behind it. It's purposed to pull a cable so that sailors could float to the surface holding onto it. But on the day of the L-24 loss, no one took advantage of it. The next day, a videographer entered the L-24 conning tower. He filmed the combat post of the submarine. There was molten metal everywhere. It made it clear the boat was on high-temperature fire. After the mine explosion, people could only survive in the distant aft compartments, but they couldn't get out of the boat. Having made sure that there were no documents in the burnt cabin, divers closed the hatches of the boat now forever. As one of the expedition participants said, he had a feeling of someone's watching him even when he was all alone. In July 1941, during the Soviet counterattack near Lepel, one BT tank drowned in a swamp. It happened near the village of Shebaki, Orsha district in Belarus. The crew managed to leave the vehicle before it went down. At first, the tank didn't sink so deeply and even a handrail antenna sticked out of the water. After the war, the antenna made of copper was dismantled by a local resident. In the early 70s, they tried to get the tank out, but it only went deeper under the water. The new stage of the BT recovery began in 1998, when the search group was created specifically for this lifting and restoration work. The group arrived at the place in November 1998. An excavator, a pump and a powerful tractor were allocated to the group to raise the tank. In order to pull the tank out, a special log structure was constructed. A diver in special equipment went down under the ice and fastened towing cables to the tank in the water black of silt. The raised machine turned out to be a BT-7 tank of the 1935 release with a cylindrical turret of BT-5 and T-26. The presence of the radio station indicated that it was a command tank. The condition amazed the searchers. When the tank was cleaned, they found everything in its place: the bolts and nuts and all the tools, gasoline in tanks, shells in boxes and full discs of cartridges. Only the radio station was destroyed by acid leaking from the batteries. The restorers got the tank going in no time. BT-7 even starred in the Pop movie, where it was remembered for its fiery exhaust from the pipe. Well-known Arnold Schwarzenegger collects tanks and wanted to replenish his collection with the BT-7, but alas, the tank of this model is the only one in the world, and it's historically priceless. German dugout. It's a long time since the end of the Second World War. The trenches were overgrown with grass and the dugouts collapsed. But sometimes diggers managed to find a place untouched by time and people. A few years ago, two friends were lucky to find a whole German dugout. The entrance was covered with earth, so they had to cut locks with a chainsaw. Looking inside, they found that the dugout was completely flooded with water. For more than 2 hours, they pumped water out. And while the motor pump was working, two friends imagined what amazing finds were waiting for them down there. The dugout could be completely clogged with German weapons, or the Third Reich awards with Hitler's bust on a table, or it could just tend to be empty. People of nearby villages could have carried all the weapons immediately after the war. After the water was pumped out, one of the diggers went down. The dugout was perfectly preserved. There was a large table with a German helmet on it and nothing else. When they cleaned the find, the helmet turned to be in an excellent condition with native paint on. There were owner's initials inside, and that increased the artifact value. You can't make much money on it, but friends will keep memories of this adventure for life. Rocket launcher. On the 7th of November 1941, 4 BM-13 Katyusha multiple rocket launchers installed on the base of STZ-5 Caterpillar tractors went to the front. In the Tula offensive operation, the division provided fire support to Soviet troops during the liberation of Stalinogorsk. On the 12th of December, having covered the concentration of German troops at Maklet station with 2 volleys from the area of Rusevo village, the division began to redeploy to the southern shore of Shat River. However, having fallen under the heavy shell, the convoy returned to Prudki and forced the Shat River across the ice. A car, a tractor and several combat vehicles passed, but one of the Katyushas sank, falling through the ice with the driver. In 1988, a veteran who witnessed the accident pointed to the place where Katyusha sank. On October 22nd, an attempt to leave the car was made, but the bracket connecting two cables burst. Only on November 25th, they managed to pull the rocket launcher to the shore. It took 5 tractors. A year later, the car was completely restored and took part in the victory parade. Air bomb. And here is another dangerous find accidentally found in Minsk during earthworks. The police officers who arrived at the scene decided to take the dangerous item to the military place and destroy it. The bomb was laid to the deep pit to reduce the spread of fragments. Then the shell was mined and detonated.
Огонь!
Steamboat Armenia. After several years of searching, the Soviet ship Armenia, sunk by the Germans during the Second World War, was found near Crimea. The loss of the ship is considered one of the largest sea tragedies in history. There were up to 10,000 refugees and wounded on board. A delay in the port of Yalta is called the fateful mistake of Captain Ploushevsky by many researchers. The ship was supposed to go to sea at night, but the loading took much time and Armenia departed only in the morning. According to one of the versions, the crew of Armenia was waiting for a valuable cargo, including gold and jewelry. But cars hurrying to the coast got stuck on the road, broken by bombs and shells. On November 7, 1941, at 10:40 a.m., after 2 aircraft bombs hit, the ship sank in 4 minutes. It was the last transport from the abandoned city. There were people from 11 hospitals, the Soviet and party activists of Big Yalta, doctors and many partisan families. Only 8 people were able to escape. The search operation took place in March 2020 and the area was examined by sonar. This study showed that there was an object resembling Armenia at 1.5 kilometers depth. A robot examined the bow of the ship, trying to find the name, but no luck. Probably it was painted with paint quickly corroded by aggressive seawater. Although there are more than enough signs to confirm that this is Armenia. Doubts disappeared after finding the noon bell on which the inscription Armenia is clearly read. In the winter of 1941, the KV-1 heavy tank slid off frozen logs, crossing the Don River, and sank. Later, when the barge moving along the river hit the tank gun and was damaged, it was decided to blow the tank up. An eyewitness said that after the explosion, the tank hatch flew high out of the water and fell into the water again several meters away. The explosion damaged the tank severely but couldn't destroy it completely. Nowadays, there are only a few tanks of this model left. The KV series tank is a Soviet heavy tank from the Second World War. In total, from 1939 to 1942, 3,163 KV-1s of various modifications were produced. 3 of them were equipped with a flamethrower instead of a machine gun. The tank had thick armor. The very first meeting with the KV shocked the Nazis. German tanks couldn't penetrate the armor. For example, a German 50mm tank gun projectile could penetrate the vertical side of the KV only from a distance of 300 meters, and the inclined front armor only from a distance of 40 meters. Anti-tank artillery was also ineffective, so armor-piercing projectile 50mm PaK 38 anti-tank gun was able to destroy the KV in favorable conditions at a distance of only less than 500 meters. The fire of 105mm howitzers and 88mm anti-aircraft gun was more effective. In 2013, it was decided to raise this combat vehicle from the water. Specialists scanned the bottom of the river to determine the exact location of the KV-1. Due to the difficult bottom topography and weather conditions, the operation was postponed until spring. And finally, from the 29th of May to the 7th of June 2014, with the forces of the National Rescue Agency, KV-1 was lifted from the bottom and transported to shore. Local people provided active assistance to the search group. For experienced agency specialists, this was the 55th, the most difficult vehicle recovery. Heat, strong currents, and zero underwater visibility brought the most trouble. In addition, the tank was sandwiched between the pillars of the old crossing. KV-1, covered with a meter-deep layer of silt, had been pulled for 4 days with a specially designed winch, first 60 meters underwater and then 20 meters on the ground. A huge number of local residents gathered to watch the legendary tank recovery. After the operation was complete, the tank was delivered to the military unit, where it's being restored. Then the KV-1 will be sent to Moscow to the museum in Kubinka. It will be the first vehicle of this type in the famous museum exposition. In 2016, a secret Nazi base was discovered in the Arctic. During the investigation in the bunkers, the items from the Second World War that belonged to the Nazis were found. The base was built by the Germans in 1942, in 1,000 kilometers from the North Pole. Alexandra Land is an island belonging to the Franz Joseph Land archipelago. It is located in the Barents Sea. Germany identified it with the code Schatzgräber, or treasure hunter. It was originally used as a weather station and as a base to exchange data with submarines. The Germans settled here for a long time. The location for the base was chosen very well, on the shore of a deep bay which is adjoined by a vast strip of tundra, free of glacial, a lake with fresh water nearby. To protect the base from land, the Nazis set up minefields to the north and east of it, and from the side of the bay a machine gun pillbox was equipped, the ruins of which are still visible. The huge amount of shoes and other equipment brought to the island is surprising. Looks like that they intended to expand this military base significantly. Some of the German supplies are still lying around. In addition, in 1960s to 1970s, when a Soviet frontier post appeared on Alexandra Land in about 15 kilometers from the base, a lot of German ammunition was taken from the base. For a long time, the border guards wore German boots, which they inherited from the war years. Besides the pillbox, there are still the remains of a house and a dugout. Examining the territory of the German base, our scientists found several of the same bomb-like containers for aviation parcels. Scraps of old camouflage nets also survived, and there are sheets of Hitler's speeches books inside the abandoned dugout. An interesting find was found closer to the bay. Here you can see a pipe going deep into the earth. Perhaps this is the part of the ventilation system of some kind of concealed structure. It can be a natural grotto, which the Germans managed to find and adapt for their purposes. It's also possible that the dimensions of this cavern are so large that the submarines could enter it. At least the existence of similar huge caves connected with the sea by underwater corridors is known to exist on other Arctic islands, and in the German sources there is information that they found such caves big enough for submarines in the north. Several years ago, diggers from Russia discovered a German dugout, which has been completely preserved intact. The dugout, where German soldiers had been stationed during the World War II, was completely sealed with earth. It took 2 days to clean the room from clay and pump the water out. It turned out that the dugout was built from sleepers that the Germans had taken from an old railway. The cross ties were soaked in oil, which made them perfectly preserved in clay. A lot of military artifacts were raised from the old dugout. These photos show only a part of the weapons and ammunition that were found inside the dugout and adjacent trench. Evidently, the German units spent a lot of time here, but then they were dislodged by the Red Army. Also, there were a lot of German and Soviet bullet cases in the trench. All the dangerous objects were drowned in the river nearby. And this story is about a girl who inherited a grandfather's apartment after his death. Her grandfather used to be an officer and was in the police. While sorting out the things on an old closet, she found a heavy bag containing cartridges for various weapons and a Luger pistol. It was a Parabellum P08 German self-loading pistol, developed in 1898 by Austrian Georg Luger. The main advantage of the Parabellum is high firing accuracy achieved due to the comfortable anatomical handle with a high inclination and an easy trigger pull. It combined high power with sufficient compactness compared to other army pistols at the beginning of the 20th century. Parabellum was used in both World Wars and is still popular with all gun lovers. The girl took all the weapons found to the police. The examinations showed that the pistol was in working order and greased. She was paid a finder's fee. In France, the First World War unexploded ordnance is still searched for. More than 100 years have passed since the war ended, but perhaps it will take as much time to find and disarm all the munition. Dozens of rusty World War I shells were raised from the Meuse River in France, west of Verdun. This place had been a significant battleground of the World War I, and thousands more unexploded shells and bombs still lie at the bottom. In just 1 day, the miners managed to get more than 5 tons of dangerous items out of the water. Experts say that there are cases when people try to touch or dismantle a dangerous find, and that leads to a tragic ending. Very often the bomb squads go to farmers' fields where rolled shells, grenades and bombs are found. Up to 50 tons of explosive can be found in the fields of France per year, and no one knows how much time it will take to remove all of them. Another World War II pistol was found by the police officers in a suspected of crimes apartment. The young man hadn't paid the utility bills for a long time, and when the workers came to disable the heating system, he took out an object looking like a gun and started threatening them. The police arrived at the scene and tried to detain the man, but he turned the gun on the officers. During the fight ensued, the man hit the policeman with a weapon in his head and face several times, but was neutralized eventually. The weapon turned out to be a 9mm German self-loading pistol Walther P38. The weapon was adopted by Germany on April 20, 1940. It gained much popularity and was used throughout the Second World War. The examination showed that the Walther was in working order and loaded. It's a miracle no one was hurt. Weapons arsenal in the river. Police officers with cadets of the Nekrasov boarding school visited the Znamensky district of the Orlov region, where 33 small arms from the Second World War were lifted by the divers on the Nugur River. The searchers of the Nasledye team managed to find the weapons cache during the underwater historical searches on the Nugur and Ors rivers, carried out from July to September 2019 as a part of the Fiery Shores project. The divers raised 5 anti-tank rifles, several rifles of the Mosin system, Diktarov machine guns and Shpagin submachine guns. All weapons are in a very good condition. as the searchers said, clean, grease, and you can go back to battle. A plane. In central Poland, a Soviet military plane was found with the remains of 2 pilots. For many years, the wreckage rested at the bottom of the Vistula tributary. Now, the river has become shallow due to the drought, and it's possible to extract fragments of the aircraft. Residents of a nearby village say they knew about the wreckage. As one of the locals say, they tried to investigate them several times, but unfortunately had no luck, since the remains were constantly hiding under at least 2 meters of water. Now I see that it's possible to extract them. The plane was shot down during the Second World War. When it crashed, it was shattered into pieces. Now archaeologists have managed to extract some of them, including the engine and the fragments of the fuselage with the cockpit. Mikhail Anchak, the Historians Association member, says, "We just dug up the cockpit. Unfortunately, it contains the remains of the pilots. We tried to remove the remains properly and carefully." Historians believe that the plane was shot down in the last year of the war. At that time, German troops were retreating here towards Berlin. The aircraft could conduct reconnaissance. Zdzislaw Lishinsky, the director of the Vistula Museum in Vyshegorod, says, "This is undoubtedly a Soviet plane. All inscriptions inside are in Cyrillic. What year was it? The cartridges inside are from 1943. At the same time, the pilots wore fur shoes and fur coats. We assume that the plane was shot down in January 1945. The rest of the aircraft fragments will be retrieved using heavy equipment, while the wings are still at a great depth. The model of the aircraft will be determined later with an examination. Experts hope to establish the identity of the pilots." About 600,000 Soviet soldiers died in battles with German troops on the territory of Poland. Armory. More than 30 weapons and several thousand cartridges were seized by the police from a resident of Sevastopol. In the basement of the garage, a cache was made in which weapons and ammunition were stored. There was also a workshop in which weapons were altered and restored. The owner of the find was a collector. According to the man, he found most of the weapons on the battlefields of the Second World War. He altered some copies for firing blank ammunition in order to participate in the reconstruction of the Second World War battles. Among the items, there were several rare specimens that have historical significance. Also, in the basement, there was an aircraft cannon from an Il-2 aircraft in perfect working order. Now, a resident of Sevastopol faces several years in prison for illegal firearms possession. The underwater recon team took a dive to a sunken submarine L2 Stalinets. "We have covered 2,200 kilometers in 2 days," Konstantin Bogdanov, a head of the underwater expedition, said. The dive itself took 3 hours. This time was enough to take photos and videos of the sunken U-boat and explore the damage. The submarine was launched on the 21st of May 1931. In 1932 it was named Stalinets. On the 15th of September 1934 it was designated as L2. The boat got the complete overhaul in Leningrad. On November 12, 1941 at 6 p.m. the U-boat left Kronstadt for a mine lane in Danzig Bay as a part of the convoy number 4 heading for the Henka Peninsula. On the night of November 14th, the boat got blown up on 3 naval mines D-46, laid by the German mine layer Kaiser. The entire crew died, except for the motor mechanic Vasily Sherbina, electrician Boykov, and senior radio operator Nikolai Klaskov, who had boarded the sinking ship Surovy and were rescued from it. A black digger's stash. Millions of World War II military artifacts are waiting in the ground to be found. Thousands of diggers go out looking for the trophies every day. Someone keeps his finds for his own collection, while the others make money restoring and selling their finds. In 2018, Russian policemen detained a Sochi resident for illegal World War II arms trade. He also bought modern blank firing guns and converted them into the firearms. During a search of his house, a whole warehouse of various weapons and ammunition was discovered. There were hundreds of cartridges of various calibers, even for anti-tank rifles, grenades, gunpowder, as well as blueprints, spare parts, and equipment for converting and repairing firearms. The arsenal's owner is looking for a serious jail time. MG42. And here is an interesting find made by one of the diggers in the woods. As you may have already guessed, this is a German MG42 machine gun. It was released in Germany in 1942 and replaced the earlier MG34 gun. For its enormous rate of fire, it got several nicknames among the Soviet soldiers, including bone cutter and Hitler's circular saw. MG42 couldn't replace its predecessor completely, and both of these models were used by German soldiers till the end of the war. Finding such a machine gun in good condition is every searcher's fantasy. You can simply brag to your friends when they come to your place, or you can remake it for firing blank cartridges and sell to World War II reenactors for a large sum. But this guy did it differently. He took it to the police. After the examination, the machine gun took its place in the local museum exposition. A case of grenades. A few years ago, a digger was lucky to find a box full of grenades in excellent condition near St. Petersburg. The find was in grey clay and oxygen couldn't damage the case. Even the experienced diggers were surprised to see the contents when the box was opened. The grenades looked new, each wrapped in oil-soaked paper. Even the paper indicating date and the packer's name was preserved. This case was packed in 1938 in Kharkov by a woman named Gavrilova. The explosives were removed and the grenades dummies took their places in numerous collections. Weapons and drugs stash. In St. Petersburg, a police officer discovered an arsenal of firearms and ammunition as well as World War II military awards. A 34-year local resident was detained and a plastic bag with cocaine was found during physical body search. The police decided to conduct a search at the suspected apartment. As a result of the search, a whole arsenal was seized, including 3 cartridges marked Luger 9mm, 3 cartridges 9x19, as well as 138 cartridges of various calibers, 3 revolvers, 5 pistols, a rocket launcher, 5 bolts, 2 submachine guns, a rifle, and 2 tablets with orders and medals of the Soviet Army, a total of 27 pieces. 88mm flag. Russian workers discovered a German 88mm anti-aircraft gun while laying a gas pipe in Belgorod region. This gun was in service from 1932 to 1945, being one of the best anti-aircraft guns of the Second World War. It also served as a model for the Tiger tank guns and Ferdinand assault guns. These guns were widely used as anti-tank and even field guns, as they had good efficiency, rate of fire and accuracy. Flak 88 proved to be good in the fight against heavy Soviet KV tanks. This gun is often called the most famous weapon of the Second World War. While examining the area, police officers found an unexploded shell, the same as the one that destroyed the German gun. Apparently, the German anti-aircraft gun fired at the Soviet positions, since the area where it was found provides an excellent view of a large area. But it also made it an excellent target for the Soviet artillery. After the barrel was examined by the deminers, it was extracted and sent for the restoration. We really hope you enjoyed the video. If you liked it, please do hit the like button, leave the comment and let us know what you think. And subscribe to the channel not to miss new videos. Nevsky Pятачок is the name of a bridgehead on the left bank of Neva River, opposite Nevskaya Dubrovka. The Russian word «пятачок» means a 5-kopek coin or a very small area. It was held by Soviet troops of the Leningrad Front during the Battle for Leningrad from September 19, 1941 to April 29, 1942, and from September 26, 1942 to February 17, 1943. From this bridgehead, Soviet troops repeatedly tried to launch an offensive on Mga and Sinявina to meet the troops that were striking from the east, and thereby break through the blockade of Leningrad. Despite the fact that all attempts to expand the bridgehead and develop the offensive ended unsuccessfully, Nevsky Pятачок became one of the symbols of courage and self-sacrifice of Soviet soldiers. During the battles of September 1942, 4 T-38 tanks sank in the Nevsky Pятачок area, which is quite a unique fact, since just 1,200 of them were produced and most of them were destroyed in the first months of the war. One of them was salvaged out of the river in 2005. The tank took part in the battles of the Leningrad Front since 1941. In 1942, it joined the first company of a separate light tank battalion. At the end of September 1942, battalion was supposed to cross over to the Nevsky Pятачок to support other troops. The first company of 10 floating tanks Aplot performed from the starting positions on the 26th of September 1942 at 3:30 am and descended towards the shore at 4:30. When descending into the water, one tank stopped for technical malfunctions and 2 vehicles had their tracks come off. All 3 of them were withdrawn to their original positions the same night. The remaining 7 tanks in the expanded line battle order descended into the water and moved to the left bank. 70 meters from the shore, one tank ran into an underwater object and sank. The enemy launched artillery and mortar fire from the shore and from the flank. 3 tanks were hit and sank, and only 3 vehicles got to the left bank and continued their accurate fire. Since the first echelon infantry crossing was delayed and the tanks were hit, the crews tried to swim back and were shot in the water. Only a few of them were able to make it back to the right bank. In February 2005, one of the tanks was pulled ashore. A machine gun was banned from being hit by a German shell, the turret was torn from the mountains, and water gushed through the hatches. The crew most likely managed to leave the combat vehicle, but its further fate is unknown. The T-38 was completely restored to running condition and now takes part in the reconstructions of the Second World War battles and exhibitions. The first serial German tank Tiger, numbered 0001, was found near St. Petersburg. On September 22, 1942, the first attack by Tiger tanks took place near Leningrad. A German platoon with 4 Tigers took part in the offensive against the Red Army. The terrain was swampy and wasn't suitable for a heavy tanks attack. Having successfully covered a few hundred meters, the tanks came under heavy artillery fire. A shell hit one of the Tigers, stalling the engine. Another tank got stuck in the mud. The remaining Tigers retreated after being damaged. Attempts to pull the stuck tank out of the swamp were unsuccessful. German bomb squad blew the first serial Tiger tank up with a large amount of explosives. In 2014, Russian diggers were able to locate the site of the tank explosion. The explosion was very powerful. Parts of the Tiger were scattered over 400 meters. The color was determined from the remains of the armor. The first Panzerkampfwagen 6 was painted yellow. The restoration of the tank isn't planned, since the large fragments couldn't be found. Most likely they were collected after the war to be melted down. All the parts found were added to the exposition of the Defense of Leningrad Museum. Thank you all for watching. Subscribe to the channel not to miss new videos. There was an old urban legend about a World War II tank buried under the foundation of a house. To everyone's surprise, it wasn't just a legend. Battles for Voronezh in 1942 were even larger than the battles for Stalingrad, but they were almost forgotten by historians. Soviet people were fighting for every single yard of Voronezh, just like in Stalingrad. German troops managed to keep only the right side of the city, separated by the river. In January 1943, the Soviet army went on the offensive, completely freeing the city from the Nazis. A lot of the broken military equipment remained on the streets. Therefore, the legend of the tank could easily have been real. In 2011, the old 2-story house under which the tank was supposed to be was demolished, but nothing was found. In September 2016, the Dawn search team carried out large-scale excavation at the site of the former house. Parts of several wrecked T-34 tanks and other military artifacts were found. It turned out that after the war there was a scrap metal collection point at this place, and not only tanks but also broken guns and even aircraft were collected here. After that, the collection point was closed, and the metal that they couldn't take out was simply buried. The found parts will go to the restoration of other T-34 tanks. In the summer of 2020, a 76mm regimental gun of the 1927 model was raised solemnly in the Kirovsky district of the Leningrad region. It was a place of great battles between the Nazis and the Red Army. This is a Soviet light regimental gun of 76.2mm caliber for infantry and cavalry direct support. It is the first large-scale model of artillery equipment created in the USSR. The gun was in serial production from 1928 to 1943 and took an active part in many pre-war armed conflicts as well as in World War II itself. In total, about 18,000 guns of this type were produced. Regimental guns were a part of the infantry combat formations and quickly suppressed enemy firing points. This gun sank during the crossing, having come under German artillery fire in October 1941. The place has long been known to the searchers, but it took a lot of time and expensive equipment to find and then raise the gun ashore. Now it will be restored and replenish the collection of the Battle for Leningrad Museum. Yak-1 airplane. In the summer of 2020, Russian diggers recovered a Soviet plane from the ground, presumably a Yak-1 fighter. The remains of the pilot were also found. Most likely, the pilot died on August 25, 1942. On this day, 9 of Soviet bombers and 6 Yak-1 fighters took off from the airfield in Livny. Their target was the airfield and station of Kastorne, an important railway junction that allowed the Germans to supply their troops at Stalingrad. Having destroyed about 30 German aircraft, they headed back to Livny. At that moment, they were attacked by a large group of German fighters. 8 bombers and 2 Yak-1 were shot down. The searchers managed to track the fate of several crew members. 4 pilots were captured, 1 was buried by local residents. The fate of the rest is unknown. The wreckage of the found Yak-1 laid at a depth of 4 meters. The diggers managed to find several fragments of the pilot's bones, part of a flight helmet and a glove. They plan to find the remaining aircraft and establish the names of the pilots. Gas AA truck. In 2015, the legendary gas AA lorry was discovered by Karelian searchers in the forest. More precisely, everything that remained of it after the battles of Winter War in 1941. Parts of the truck showed multiple bullet holes. Probably a column of Soviet troops was ambushed and defeated. The Finns took all the working vehicles as a trophy, and this gas remained in the forest for 75 years. With great difficulty, the searchers managed to pull the car parts out of the forest for restoration. Many of them are rare because the lorry's cabin was made of wood, and the fenders and headlights were made of very thin metal that quickly decays in the open air. For example, over past few years, several cars have been lifted out of the water near St. Petersburg, but only the frame with wheels and the engine with gearbox remained intact. The body and the cab were almost completely destroyed by water. In October of this year, another such truck was raised from the bottom of Ladoga. The body was partially preserved, but the cabin was broken. The car didn't reach Leningrad and stopped forever only 8 kilometers away, where it was attacked by enemy aircraft. Divers found pieces of burlap at the bottom. Presumably, the car was carrying bread or flour to the besieged city. Let's hope that the lorry can be restored to running condition. Focke-Wulf FW190. The Kurgan search party discovered the wreckage of the German Focke-Wulf 190 fighter in the Panirovsky district. The remains of the pilot and his personal belongings were also found. During World War II in the summer of 1943, a German plane was shot down and fell into a kitchen garden just 50 meters from a residential building. The search party worked 3 days at the crash site. The clay soil has well preserved the aircraft parts. The engine was 8 meters deep. We also managed to find a plate with the engine number. Now, the pilot's name needs to be established to inform his relatives in Germany. The pilot is most likely reported missing. Messerschmitt Bf 109. In the spring of 2016, a search group discovered the crash site of Messerschmitt 109 with a pilot in the Krasnodar region. Spilled technical fluids served as an excellent preservative for aircraft parts and pilot himself. Many personal belongings and a parachute were found. On the pilot's finger there was a gold ring with a family coat of arms. The pilot's name was established by a personal badge found. He was a young and inexperienced pilot and died on one of his first flights. The remains and personal belongings were transferred to the German side. Thank you all for watching. Subscribe to the channel not to miss new videos. A unique operation off the coast of Crimea is now complete. A legendary Air Cobra, a frontline fighter sunken at the end of the World War II, was found and raised from the bottom. In total, 4,952 P-39 Air Cobra fighters were delivered to the USSR under Lend-Lease, which is approximately half of the total number of aircraft produced. The aircraft had an impressive armament: one 37mm M4 cannon with 30 rounds, or one 20mm M1 cannon with 60 rounds, two 12.7mm M2 machine guns with 270 rounds each, four 7.62mm machine guns 1,000 rounds each, and one bomb up to 272 kilograms. The World War II find was discovered by amateur divers. The frontline fighter was less than 1 kilometer from the coast, at a depth of only 8 meters. Only a part of the blade and a lantern were visible above the bottom soil. The divers had to clear the hull of silt manually and then wash the soil out of the cockpit. From the numbers on the landing gear and the engine, it was established that this aircraft was a part of 11th Guard Fighter Regiment, which in 1943 covered the landing of the Kerch-Eltigen landing. It bombed enemy positions and participated in the liberation of the Crimea in 1944. In February 1945, this aircraft, as part of the Air Group, provided security of the Crimea during the Yalta Conference. This plane was lost in July 1945 during a training flight. It was piloted by a junior Lieutenant Vladimir Shishkin. He felt a vibration in the engine and decided to land on the water. The plane sank within 30 seconds after the splashdown. Shishkin swam to the shore and reached the unit on his own. Soon, this plane is to make an excellent museum exhibit, and every single one will be able to see what was available only to a few.